Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Patriots History. I'm Larry Swikart, co-author of Patriots History of the United States with Michael Allen, now in its 43rd printing. Make sure if you want a Christmas gift of Patriots History, maybe combined with globalism or other books, we have great offers today at the Wild World of History of Christmas offers. 2, 3, and 4 book packages sent right to you, all autographed by moi. Well, we are, as always, reading from the 15th anniversary edition of Patriots History. If you have an earlier edition, the pages won't line up, and sometimes the headers won't line up, but usually the headers will, but not always. So we're starting a brand new chapter here, Chapter 12, Sinews of Democracy. We just finished Reconstruction. So I am on page 438. By the way, if you don't have the updated 20th anniversary edition, which is my way of saying a brand new chapter 23 from 2018 to 2023, email me at larry@wildworldhistory.com. I'll send it to you free. It's a PDF of this chapter plus inserts that go with the rest of the book. Okay, Sinews of Democracy, 1876 to 96, Life After Reconstruction. With Reconstruction essentially over, the nation shifted its attention from the plight of the freedmen toward other issues, settling the West, the rise of large-scale enterprise, political corruption, and growth of large cities. Chief among the new concerns was the corrupt spoils system. Newspapers loved graft and corruption because these topics are easy to write about, and they provided reporters with clear villains and strong morality plays. Patronage also dominated political discourse because the aggressive wing of the Republican Party dedicated to overthrowing what it saw as vestiges of Jacksonianism. Remember, this is where the spoils system came from, was Martin Van Buren and the rise of Jacksonianism. Moreover, the spoils issue and political corruption spilled over into almost all other aspects of American life. It affected the transcontinental railroads through the Credit Mobilier scandal. It had reached into city administration in the reign of Boss Tweed, and it plagued the Bureau of Indian Affairs and its network of dishonest agencies. Large-scale businesses became targets of reformers because, in part, through their political influence, they were seen as buying legislation. Rutherford B. Hayes inherited this continuing debate over spoils, and when he left the presidency, the issue had not been resolved. So then we go into our timeline, and the next header, President Hayes. Having survived the closest election in American history, Rutherford Hayes, his fraudulency, as he was called, may not have had Reconstruction to deal with, but other issues soon consumed him. Hayes knew that federal intervention had reached its limits in the South, and other means would be required to change both its attitudes and reality. The nature of his own election meant that he was compromised, and he hoped that business revitalization and economic recovery might do for the freedmen what the government could not. Hayes and his wife, Lemonade Lucy, as she was referred to by reporters because of her non-alcoholic table habits, interested the press far more than his actual policies. Lucy Hayes, an attractive woman, captured public fancy, and her religious stamp on the White House gave it a much different tone from that of the Grants had set. Soon, however, attention turned to Hayes's actions as president. He immediately summoned the South Carolina Republican governor, Daniel Chamberlain, to a Washington meeting where he reiterated his intention that the federal troops withdraw. Chamberlain, realizing the situation, agreed. When Hayes addressed reform of civil service, he was certain to anger many in his own party, as well as in the Democratic House. Still, he set to it almost immediately, writing in April 1877, quote, "Now for civil service reform, we must limit and narrow the area of patronage." Through an executive order, Hayes prohibited federal office holders from taking part, quote, "in the management of political organizations, caucuses, conventions, or election campaigns." Yeah, tell that to Obama or Biden's staff. This seemed to defy Logic. After all, many of the best practitioners of spoils asked what other reason for winning office was there than participating in this stuff. Starting with an investigation of the New York Custom House and its excesses under Chester A. Arthur, no better, whom Hayes removed in July 1878, Hayes sought to bring the patronage monster to heel. And by the way, I discussed this at length in my other book, Dragon Slayer, Six Presidents and Their War with the Swamp. Both Arthur and a naval officer whom Hayes also removed, Alonzo Cornell, were pets of New York Roscoe Boss Conkling, and the action sparked a revolt among the spoilsmen in Congress against the president. Conkling held up confirmation of Hayes's replacements in the Senate, one of whom, for Arthur's spot, was Theodore Roosevelt, Sr. But Hayes prevailed. The president attempted to institute, quote, a new tone when it came to spoils, instructing his fellow Republicans, quote, let no man be put out because he is Mr. Arthur's friend, and no man be put in merely because he is our friend. But the words sailed right over many in the party. Still on a variety of issues, the Democrat-controlled House began to challenge or ignore the president outright, passing the Bland-Allison Act of 1878, purchasing large amounts of silver over his veto. At the same time, an indictment of two members of the Louisiana Election Board that had certified Hayes as the winner gave the Democrats the opening they needed to try to unseat him through the courts. So what happened against Donald Trump was different in form, but old in its general approach. A new spate of investigation into 1876 fraudulent returns, sponsored by the Democrats, backfired, unifying the deeply divided Republicans behind the president, who vowed to fight, quote, rather than submit to removal by any means of the constitutional process of impeachment. He got little favorable treatment from the press, of which he disparagingly remarked that only two of God's creatures would employ the term we, newspaper editors and men with tapeworms. No sooner had Hayes reviewed the reports of his subordinates on civil service reform than the country was racked by a new series of railroad strikes over pay cuts enacted by the B&O Railroad, Monopoly Board fame. From Baltimore to Pacific, bloodshed ensued when strikers fought strike breakers and state militia forces, and soon clashes occurred in Ohio and New York. Honing to a strictly legalistic line, Hayes instructed federal troops to protect U.S. property, but otherwise not to interfere on either side. By midsummer 1877, the strikes had subsided. A bill to restrict Chinese laborers passed Congress, but Hayes vetoed it, further angering the labor movement. Labor unrest, coupled with the Bland-Allison veto and Republican disunity, gave the Democrats both the House and the Senate in 1878. Still, by continually forcing Hayes to use the veto, recalcitrant Republicans and disaffected Democrats gave the president more power than he would have had otherwise. Using the veto is a presidential power. It strengthens the presidency. So when Jackson vetoed more bills than all previous presidents combined, it did not weaken the presidency. Some say he's a small government guy. No, Jackson strengthened the presidency and made it bigger. Still, by continually forcing Hayes to use the veto, recalcitrant Republicans and disaffected Democrats gave the president more power than he would have had otherwise, since he gained both notoriety and popularity from the veto pen. His patience and decorum restored some degree of respect for the presidency. Best of all, in the eyes of voters, Hayes had avoided Grantism. Hayes demilitarized the South and introduced civil service reform, all remarkable achievements for a man who was a lame duck from the get-go. Controlling the spoils beast. How far will we go here? All right. The Hayes tenure ended with a string of vetoes. At the Republican convention, Hayes, like others, was surprised to see a dark horse, James A. Garfield, emerge with the nomination. Old spoilsmen, known as Stalwarts, had hoped to get Grant a third term, whereas reformers, known as half-breeds, supported James G. Blaine of Maine, Maine's perpetual motion machine. Blaine was a big-picture thinker, uninterested in the details or tactics of process. Other than his commitment to reform, which was constantly under press suspicion because of his lavish lifestyle well above his means and his mountain of debt, Blaine had little to recommend him to the presidency. He had, for example, an empty legislative record. Hayes's favorite, John Sherman of Ohio, also sliced away votes from the frontrunners, but Sherman had no chance at the presidency either. His personality was dull, his voting record was consistent for his district, but lacked vision for the nation, and his rhetoric was uninspiring. To offset the reformers and placate the thus Garfield emerged from the pack as the natural compromise candidate. To offset the reformers and placate the conquering stalwart wing, Chester Arthur, remember the guy that Hayes fired, received the vice presidential nomination, a personal affront to Hayes, who had dismissed him. Like Hayes, Garfield came from Ohio, where he had served as the president of Hiram College before being elected to the House of Representatives. Literate in several languages, Garfield had come from near poverty and was the last president born in a log cabin. His father had abandoned the family while James was a toddler, so he began working at a young age driving oxen and mule teams on Ohio's canals. He had fought in the Civil War, advancing through the officer ranks to brigadier general, but Lincoln persuaded him to resign to run for Congress. In 1880, Garfield was elected to the Senate and worked to secure the presidential nomination for Sherman, but before he could even take his seat, he agreed to be the Republican nominee, winning after 36 ballots. The Democrats offered their own war hero, Winfield Scott Hancock, who had received wounds while fearlessly commanding Union troops from horseback on Cemetery Ridge at Gettysburg. He lacked significant political experience, and during the campaign, the Republicans published an elegantly bound large book called Record of Statesmanship and Achievements of Winfield Scott Hancock. It was filled with blank pages. The ex-soldier Hancock also managed to shoot himself in the foot by uttering the words that all but sealed his doom, quote, "The tariff question is a local question." Despite a close popular vote, Garfield won a decisive electoral college victory, 214 to 155. With this election, the Confederate South became solidly Democratic and remained so for almost a century. Arthur may have been Garfield's sop to the Stalwarts. Let me say that again. Arthur may have been Garfield's sop to the Stalwarts, but Senator Conkling expected far more for his support, which had handed to Garfield the critical electoral votes of New York. He, Conkling, made clear that he expected the new president to meekly accept any nominations he put forward. Garfield had a reputation as a conciliator, and he had no intention of allowing boss Conkling to dictate federal patronage. After a power play in which Conkling resigned, New Yorkers had had enough, and the legislation retired him. Garfield's nomination sailed through, including Lincoln's eldest son, Robert, whom Garfield appointed Secretary of War. No one knows what Garfield's tenure might have accomplished, since on July 2nd, 1881, he was shot in a Washington train station by a disgruntled job seeker, Charles Guiteau. Guiteau had spent time in John Humphrey Noyes' Oneida community, where he enthusiastically welcomed the doctrine of free love, although apparently no one reciprocated, for his nickname was Charles Get Out. Broken, mentally unstable, Guiteau had demanded the consulship to Vienna in return for voting for Garfield. The assassin's bullet did not immediately kill the president, though. Garfield lingered for weeks as doctors searched fruitlessly for the bullet. He died on September 19th, 1881. That made Arthur president, even though he had been the de facto president for many months. No one was more stunned at the administration of the new president than the Stalwarts, who insisted on his vice presidency and who now paid a heavy price in the press. Editors blamed Stalwarts for creating the climate of animosity that could produce a Guiteau, and several Stalwarts observed that they could be instantly hanged in certain cities. Meanwhile, the man associated with corruption and patronage in New York, and that would be Arthur, ironically proved a paragon of character as president. I want to say this is one of the first and perhaps only times in American history where a guy was elected and he got better instead of worse than when he took the office by accident, right? He vetoed a rivers and harbors bill that was nothing more than political pork barreling. He prosecuted fraud, and in 1883 he signed what was considered the death blow to spoils, the Pendleton Civil Service Act. It was not, but that's what they thought. Elegant Arthur was the son of a Baptist preacher from Vermont. His patronage positions made him more of a master of the actual details of government than either Hayes or Garfield. Moreover, Arthur never personally participated in the graft and had endeavored to make New York Customs House free of graft. But he also viewed patronage as a legitimate prerogative of elected officials and the lubricant of politics, and he wielded the appointment powers of his customs position liberally if within the letter of the law. Thus, the charges of corruption against him technically never contained any basis in fact, but often gave Arthur the appearance of impropriety. What surprised Republicans as much as Arthur's position on patronage was his rapid action to reduce the tariff in 1883, arguably making him the first in a long, though not uninterrupted line of Republican tax cutters. He gained labor's favor by backing the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882. After learning he had Bright's disease, which at the time was inevitably debilitating and fatal, he made it clear he would not run for re-election, therefore diminishing his political clout. I like Arthur a lot. Too bad he couldn't have served a couple of terms. Pretty good president for the time. Next time we will pick up with material abundance and social reform. Probably see you here next week. Until then, go check out the Wild World of History and the curriculum we have there for U.S. and world history. For high schoolers, I teach every lesson in video, high production video. I'm working right now on a government constitution class and on an economics class. It would each be a one semester course, so that you'd have a third option here: U.S. history, world history, and government economics. Remember, if you're interested in more politics, go over to the Wild World of Politics and sign up for the Insider. You'll get my political commentary 3 days a week, and you'll get all sorts of videos, including Globalism Then and Now, exclusive only to Wild World of Politics. My series on integrity with Winston Churchill, which is in both the VIP on history and Insider on politics, and the new series that we'll have up soon, Billy Graham, Integrity with Billy Graham. So I will see you guys maybe back here on Wednesday or Friday. We'll see. Holidays are coming.